Reflections with Marilyn Baker. Brought to you by Torch Trust, the Christian organisation with a vision for people with sight loss.
Hello and welcome along to this edition of Reflections from the Torch Trust, the UK's Christian sight loss charity. On Reflections this week, we're going to hear the testimony of Doctor Trevor Stammers. For decades, Trevor had a head knowledge of God, but it took a season of total darkness for that faith to reach his heart. Trevor Stammers was a man of science, an expert in medical ethics, and a GP on the verge of total burnout. Then in a single hour, his world went dark. One eye failed. Then, while teaching a class on the fear of blindness, the other followed. 7 months of total blackout forced the self-titled grumpy doctor to finally listen to the God he always had known about but never truly felt. Trevor is in conversation with Mark Maddavan.
Reflections from Torch Trust.
How does blindness impact, or how has it impacted your life?
Well, it didn't impact my life personally at all until 2010, but I have been a general practitioner for 30 years, and so I have encountered it amongst my patients. And in fact, one of my patients who'd been blind from the age of 6 worked for the BBC, and it had always struck me as to how bubbly and full of life she was. She was a Christian as well, as it happens, and she may come back in the story a bit later on. But my personal encounter with it, I remember the day and the hour. And I had left general practice by this time and was working as an academic in a university teaching medical ethics. And it was about 1:45, and I was getting ready to go to a meeting on the 8th of March 2010. I was just gathering up my things, and suddenly it looked as if one of those old sort of 8mm cine projectors, the film had just shot out of the spool in my left eye, and it just went all blurry and then completely black. And I turned to my colleague and said, I think the retina's just come off my left eye. And could you give my apologies to the meeting, because I've got to go down to our local eye hospital, which is Kingston Eye Hospital, and get this checked out. And unfortunately, I was right. And they said, we can't do much about that here. We've got to send you up to Moorfields. So they gave me a letter, and the next day found me sitting slightly anxiously in the waiting room of Moorfields Eye Hospital.
So it's that real thing that you were sat, first of all, you're sat on the expert side of the table and helping and trying to care, and then life turned around. I do want to just commend your politeness, as in, please excuse me from this meeting, my retina just detached. Was it as calm as that?
It was pretty calm at that point.
Oh, what a gentleman you must be.
But that was against a background of considerable turmoil when I was sitting in that outpatient waiting room. But I did have a most extraordinary experience. I mean, having done the career in science that I've done, I would say that my faith, although it has affected my emotions, was usually pretty much a head sort of knowledge. But as I sat in that waiting room, I had a consciousness of God saying to me, I am in this. And I also had come to mind the only story, I think, in the whole of any of the Gospels where Jesus has to touch somebody twice in order to heal them, and that was a blind man. And also a verse came into my mind that for me at that time actually was very relevant, and it's one of Jesus' harshest sounding sayings where he says something along the lines of, it is better for you to enter heaven with one eye than to enter hell with both. And you may want to sort of come back to that in a moment. But when I saw the consultant, well, I saw several consultants, actually. They had everybody along to have a look at it. But one of their top guys came along and had a look at it. And he said, yes, this is bad, but I am 99% certain that with 2 or 3 operations, we will be able to restore your sight. And it turned out, actually, that I did have 2 operations on it on the end, because the second one went so well, they did the third procedure at the same time. But they also said, your right eye is absolutely fine, except it wasn't. And a month later, that detached as well. So at that point, it had left me completely sightless.
Wow. Okay. So let me just unpack that a little bit. So, with losing sight is immediately seem to connect up with your faith and where's God in there? But actually, I trust God in there and I think God's in there and it can't get worse, but then it got worse. So that sounds like a challenging season, shall we say?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And it was an absolutely life-changing season as well. Because when the second eye went, I mean, you couldn't make it up. I was actually in the middle of acting out a scenario in a teaching exercise at Guy's Hospital where an actor was playing a diabetic patient. And I was questioning him. And it was evident from the clues that he was throwing out that, he was worried about losing his sight, which is quite common with diabetes. And we were about halfway through this scenario in front of an audience of GPs. And I realized that, the blurring and the cine camera was going in my right eye as well. So as soon as that scenario was over, I turned to the person leading it and I said, I've got to go up to Moorfields. I think I'm going blind in my remaining good eye. But I did get presented much earlier with that one. So the eventual procedures they needed to do on that weren't quite so dramatic as with the left eye. But that still meant that I had approximately 7 months of not being able to see at all.
And I'm guessing not knowing whether, because even with surgery, there's no guarantee that...
Absolutely right.
So there was a real crisis moment or season where you went from fully sighted GP, here a guy who helps, to all of a sudden you're blind and not sure. And you said your faith linked into that as well. During that 7 months of blackout, what was going through your minds? How 2 things. One is practically, how did that impact your life? And secondly, well, how did that impact your faith? Because you've already flagged that faith had an impact on that.
Well, I think there were a number of incidents that stick in my mind from that time that really impacted on my faith. And I think that now I'm this many years on, I can probably talk more frankly about elements going on behind the scenes than I would have done even 5 or 6 years ago. I'd been practicing medicine for decades at that point, and I think it would be fair to say that I was, at the time I lost my sight, on the edge of burnout. And so it was something that stopped me in my tracks, and I had to stop working. And I actually asked my wife last evening, knowing that I've been doing this interview, how my blindness impacted her. And she replied, well, you were pretty grumpy. And that was an understatement. I was really very easily riled before my sight went. And I wasn't really in a particularly good place spiritually looking back on it. But I think sometimes you arrive at these places and you until a crisis happens, and boy, was going blind a crisis, you're then brought face to face with other elements too. And I remember one day trying to make myself a hot drink and pour water from a kettle into a cup. And of course it overflowed. And fortunately I wasn't burnt, but I heard it splashing. And I thumped my fist down on the stone tabletop, and yeah, and I may or may not have sort of said something to God that only He could hear.
Like, gosh, golly, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So my grumpiness had at that point reached a state of anger against the background of my feeling at the beginning that all would be well. And one of the things that really helped it to be well was that friends and my wife and family, but particularly my wife, really, became my eyes and enabled me to cope. We certainly had a good friend who just happened to be the disability person at Kingston Council. And she said, "Oh, Trevor, you shouldn't be pouring water into cups. There's a gadget I can give you that, will do a beep when it gets to the top." And so various pieces of helpful equipment, an indicator cane and so on, were given to make life easier. But I can remember going to church the first time when I couldn't see at all, and my wife leading me to a seat and thinking, I have not loved you well. And in spite of my handicap, and perhaps because of it, she consistently loved me well. So there was a whole dynamic of that going on too.
There was a lot bubbling around in that pot, wasn't there?
It surely was. And just because you're a doctor, that does not mean that you have got it sorted out. And I think since I've left the profession, I realized that, we're all the same. And in the consulting room, we're both human beings, and we're both in need of help beyond ourselves and beyond medicine from time to time.
So from that, I mean, in metaphorical and physical, from that dark place of, I think, facing please correct my words if it's not correct, of just facing a lot of truths about Trevor and realities of a Trevor, and that I'm guessing not really enjoying and skipping along with what you're discovering. Is that a fair thing of where you're at?
Yes.
So, I mean, you're not there anymore. You're not in that place anymore. So how did you get out of that?
I think there were several factors in that. One was that the progress of the operations on the left eye had, as I said, gone really, really well. And the procedure that I had done was filling the eye with oil to hold the retina on. And then after you have the oil sucked out in the second operation, you have to wait for the eye to fill with fluid. So the sight gradually sort of comes back from the top bottom. I mean, it's a strange experience, but I knew that was beginning to come back. So I should be able to see with at least one eye. So there was sort of hope being realized there, if you like. But I think the other side of it was that blindness had stopped me from doing the job that I did. And I think in those very early weeks, I also felt God saying to me very clearly, you will not go back to practicing medicine again. And I haven't seen a patient professionally since that time. But I had been teaching medical ethics part-time. And during the course of my recovery, where I was beginning to get some sight back, the professor of medical ethics got a job offer in Oxford and for some reason thought he should take it. And so they were really desperate at rather short notice to find somebody else to lead the course that I was just doing part-time teaching on. So I applied for that job and went along with my cane and the promise of a full recovery of my sight from Moorfields. And they gave me the job. So I'd had a transition from doing a job that really I should not have been doing anymore to one that I could begin to do and make use of my medical expertise, but also, have a completely different and less stressful environment. So in a way, I think you can never know the path that you haven't trod. But I do see that as a way in which my life might have been saved from worse than blindness. And in case that sounds glib, it's certainly not. And I don't think that you can ever say that, God gives you X, Y, or Z in the way of illness just to teach you things. But I think that as the path of life goes along through what you experience, he clearly does teach you. And I hope that I have been a less grumpy individual since then.
Well, at least your wife said you were grumpy. She didn't say you
She
are grumpy.
did.
There was a past tense there going on.
She did. I'll have to check that out tonight.
An interesting verse that's just going through my head when you're saying that is Psalm 23, which the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And he makes me lie down in green pastures. And we know the verse, leads me by still waters. But just on that, he makes me lie down in green pastures. And to me, there's almost a sense of force or restriction is God says, I need you to stop. And though it didn't sound very green, your pasture, but actually he was getting you out of a probably destructive pasture that you were in with, if you're close to burnout and tents and stuff. I think God sometimes stops us in places and it's trying to go, I need to rest, I need to recalibrate, which sounds like it was a massive recalibration process that you encountered.
Yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot going on there.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I haven't thought about that psalm in that particular light. But I think that if we believe as we do that, the Lord is our shepherd, then no matter what crisis hits us in life, we're going to come through it by his help and by finding out what it is that, God is saying to us in that particular situation.
I know that Torch Trust tries to help and direct people to help normal resources and also to faith things as well. What's your connection with Torch Trust?
Well, that's another story of sort of angels unawares. One of my best friends at uni, he had been a solicitor, but in retirement, he went full-time with a Christian organization that was exhibiting at the resources exhibition at Sandown, which is not far from where we live. And they usually come to stay with us. And so they came to stay with us also after I had become blind. And he said to me, would you like to come with us to the exhibition and, we'll look after you. And my recollection was that as soon as we walked in through the doors of the exhibition centre, Gordon Temple appeared, who was, I think, the director or CEO of Torch Trust at that time, and spoke to Andrew and said, is your friend blind? And indeed I was. He said, well, you might like to come and join our lounge. So Gordon shepherds me off and I meet some of the Torch Trust staff, and I don't remember precisely all that we talked about, but I knew sitting there that even if I never regained my sight, there were people who knew resources that would enable me to do the things I love. I love reading, and I love reading novels. So I heard all about audio books and got a machine to take those, and it gave reassurance and hope. And it established a connection with Torch Trust that's been ongoing since that time.
That's great. I think that little phrase you said, it just gave a connection to hope, because I think sometimes that's what you get it through God and faith, but actually it's not just you and God alone. It's with other people, and to find out there's other resources and there's ways that they may not be able to immediately fix it in the way you want it to be fixed, but actually you're not alone and God can do some transformation in that area.
Yeah.
We're running out of time, sadly. But I'm asking all my guests the question that if you were to be able to go back in time and speak to Trevor in his late teens, early 20s, what would mature Trevor today want to say to young Trevor, the whippersnapper, back then?
Oh, very definitely. Don't take yourself so seriously. Don't think that you can do it alone. Don't think that you're as clever as you think you are. And don't think that just because you're a Christian, your life is going to be, a life of enchantment and free from difficulty.
Wow. That's some really helpful things and things to reflect on a little bit, but I think there's a lot of real truth in that as well. Trevor, it's been a delight to spend some time with you, to hear your story, thank you for the honesty in that. And I'm just delighted that you've encountered God in that way, and you have your sight back now, that thankfully the surgery was good, but you're still just cheering others on and wanting to encourage others on as well.
A truly remarkable testimony of Dr. Trevor Stammers, who was chatting to Mark Maddavan about how he lost his sight, not knowing if surgery would ever actually restore his vision. But during that time, he fully found God, which forced a massive recalibration of his life. There are more testimonies just like Trevor's on the Blind Faith podcast, which you can listen to on the Torch Trust website, torchtrust.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for the Blind Faith podcast from the Torch Trust. Well, that's just about it for this week here on Reflections. So from me, Marilyn Baker, and all of us on the Reflections team, God bless.
Reflections from Torch Trust.